All right, on page 29, we have the final chapter of God's assurances for a happy marriage, and there at the bottom of the page, just by way of introduction, that marriage is a part of God's plan for happiness. Matthew 19 is not so much a statement that of such, but it is a follow-up to Genesis chapter 2. Matthew 19, 4-6 is God's law on marriage. Most people think that Matthew 19:9 is God's law on marriage. Matthew 19:9 is God's exception to his law on marriage. Matthew 19, 4-6 is God's law on marriage, and that is that a man should leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two be one flesh. And Jesus added to that, what God has joined together, let not man put asunder. But behind all of that is in Genesis chapter 2, where after God had created man on day 6, that he brought all the animals to Adam. But he brought the animals to Adam after he recognized, and when I say recognized, not like he discovered it, like, oh, I forgot something. But insofar as the way that the text lays out when Moses penned it, that he had made male and female of all the birds, all the beasts, all the beasts of the field, every creeping thing. And it says, and God said, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him, one who answers to him literally. But from that point, God brings the other animals to Adam to name them. In other words, God has already recognized that it's not good for man to be alone, but rather than solving that problem, he emphasizes the fact to Adam that you are alone. In other words, all of the animals that God had created that had been made male and female, God paraded them before Adam and he named them. And so God was emphasizing, in my opinion, emphasizing to Adam his own lack of a mate, his own lack of a companion. And so then, after it is really brought to Adam's attention that he is alone, then God makes woman, and so there is the underlying idea that marriage is not just simply made for procreation, as some religions tend to emphasize, but rather that marriage is made primarily for companionship and holiness. Companionship and holiness. Now, obviously, procreation, the continuation of the human species, is integral to marriage. Is integral to that. But God made marriage for the purpose of companionship and holiness. And so, I was in. We were out of town last week, and for a wedding. And one of the things that I mentioned in the wedding is that there are very few men who manage to make their way through life without marrying. I don't know if anybody's ever noticed that or not, but there's a reason for that. The reason is seen that that God recognizes that it's not good for man to be alone. But the point is that there is inherent in essentially every single one of us the desire for the happiness that comes from the institution or the creation of marriage. In Proverbs 5 and verse 18, the Bible says, "Rejoice with the wife of your youth," which is a contrast in many ways to what God said when he condemned the Israelites in Malachi 2 in verse 14-16, how they had dealt treacherously with the wives of their youth. In other words, they had, by most commentaries or indications, that they had put away the wives of their youth and taken younger wives. And God condemned them for that. And he said, she is your companion by covenant. And there's a joy, there's a happiness that ought to be found also in the covenant, or the concept of covenant in our marriages. All right, so now bottom of page 29. A spiritual foundation contributes to a happy marriage. Psalm 127 and verse 1, unless the Lord builds a house, they labor in vain that build it. Now, I don't really think that David's speaking specifically to marriage, but it is nonetheless true that we miss something that God intends for us when we don't do things God's way. You know, whatever it is that it might be, we miss out. There's something lacking when we don't do things God's way or include God in the things that we do. And so on the bottom page 29, it says that husbands and wives should read their Bibles and pray together. Read their Bibles together and pray together. Marriages cannot thrive when the only emphasis is on physical things. Also, it says marriages will mature, flourish, and be sustained throughout life when the Bible serves as its focus and foundation. The Bible is the focus and the foundation of our marriages. Ron and I were just talking about this, I guess it was yesterday or the day before. We were talking about that I'm writing it. I've already written it. Now, what they decide to do with it is their business. But I wrote a chapter for the Jenkins Institute. They're putting together another daily devotion book. That's 5 days. It's 5 days of devotions and on a particular theme. And then there's a companion book, which is for preachers or Bible class teachers, which is basically sermon outlines. And they asked me to write one of the sermon outlines for the chapter with 5 devotions in it. And I wrote 7. And so I told Dale, I said, you can do this, you can do one of 2 things. I said, you can take all of it, you can take none of it. You can tell me to do what you asked me to do, or you can just pretend that this is one sermon with 7 points and go from there. But it's 4 pages. It's 4 pages of sermon outlines on the armor of God. But I said all that to say this, that you know these and I've thought about doing this in time past, and I've just never. I guess I don't say I get around to it. I guess I never felt compelled enough to do it. You know, but I think it would probably be a good thing for us as a congregation to pursue an idea like that, where we have our daily devotion books, and then on Sunday we come together and there'll be a central idea on Sunday concerning the things that we've involved ourselves in through the week. But secondarily to that is, I think that those types of things could help, particularly those of us that are married, to spend more time. In other words, having our minds directed in the same, or focused in the same direction every single day as we prepare to worship on Sunday. So I'm going to get with Dale and ask him this week what book he thinks is best along those lines, and we'll see about pursuing that. But I think it would be helpful for many of us that are married to spend, an idea like this would be helpful for us to spend more time engaged in a study and a reading of the Word of God. All right, on page 30. On page 30, there is the importance of devotion, of a devotional life in the marriage relationship. And in the end of the third line, you know, each couple, I'm not sure exactly how he intends this, but you know, each individual should have a devotion life, and then the couple should have a devotion life. In other words, that each, you know, and by the way, those two things don't have to be separated. Again, talking about that book, you know, you could both study on your own and then come together and talk about the things that you've studied together. But every Christian needs an individual devotion life, and I don't mean just like daily Bible reading, which I think obviously is very important for Christians to read the Bible every day. But there needs to be time set aside to think about the things, to meditate on the things, and to pray about the things that we study. And in the middle of that first paragraph there, under the importance of a devotional life, it says a private devotional life will enhance a couple's relationship with God. Okay, that's pretty self-explanatory. And a devotional life will provide them with faithful spiritual counsel. And then a couple's devotional life will assist them in all of their spiritual battles. And then fourth, a private devotional life will help the couple maintain their spiritual health. It has been my experience that the more time that I spend reading and thinking about spiritual things, how often, how would I say this? What's the best way to say it? How often my mind is provoked about what I've read by some event through the course of the week. In other words, let's just say I'm studying the book of Philippians this week. And by the way, everybody that's going to be at the fellowship building tonight is going to have a test on the book of Philippians. That thing is still on. All right, but let's just say I've been engaged in a reading and a study of the book of Philippians. Invariably, something happens during that week that brings to mind something that I've just studied. And it doesn't matter if I'm studying Genesis or if I'm studying Philippians, or I'm studying 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. Makes absolutely no difference what I'm studying. When I spend more time in study and meditation, my mind is more attuned or keenly aware of how the Bible speaks to all of life's situations. What's that, John? Yeah, the frontlet. Yeah, I mean it's always right there. But how many? But then you think, how many times did I miss something? How many times did something happen and I missed it because my mind wasn't attuned or in tune with the Word of God? So devotion life is critical for marriage, but it's also critical for us as individuals. Then number 2 is this: the challenge of a devotional life. Of course, the books that I've mentioned I hope will be helpful to us, but there's a number of things here. Number 1, have good, useful tools ready and available for your devotion time. Now, this series is not like super old, all right? But all the things that are listed here almost are available online now. That's one of the great things about the internet is that man, you have access to essentially the entire library of the world. You think about having the entire world's library at your fingertips. The number of commentaries, dictionaries, lexicons, devotion studies. It's unbelievable how much we have at our fingertips. Had I been preaching this 20 years ago, I'd say, hey man, you need to get a Vine's dictionary and a Strong's Concordance, and if you really want to get after it, get you Thayer's lexicon, because all 3 of those books are number coded together and they work together, and they're really good. They're a really good resource, and now you can pick your phone up and you can have all those things. You can have all for free, and you can take them with you anywhere you go. But having good Bible tools, using websites like Bible Hub, Blue Letter Bible. There are a number of great resources out there for Christians. And then Keeping a notebook or journal to record your personal gleanings and applications. Many people use a wide margin Bible for that purpose. I've never been a Bible writer, ever. I just don't write in my Bible. And yet, Bill Burke has a wide margin Bible that's got thousands of notes in it. 3-point sermon outlines, word studies, and so there are any number of ways. There are any number of ways for you to keep a record of what you're doing. Many of the devotion books have either associated journals that go with them, or they have places to write. And I don't know about the book that the ladies are using now. I haven't looked at it that closely. I did know there's an associated journal. Is there room in the actual book itself to do any writing at all? No. Okay, but it shows us the importance of writing down the things that we learn. We did this a number of years ago on Sunday nights, studying various denominational doctrines, and everybody had a notebook. That we went through, and we did this for months on end, studying the denominational doctrines and the verses that supposedly teach them, and then also writing down how to deal with those things, and it was designed to, number one, teach, but also to be a resource. And so writing these things down is helpful as a resource, but it's also helpful so we can remember. We write things down, we think about them, we write them down, and it helps us to remember them. Number 3, have a specific time and place to have your devotional together. And this would also work as an individual. Wednesdays used to be your day. Was that right, Ashley? No, if it's done in a haphazard way, it's never going to be effective. You have to set that time, and you have to set that place, and you have to set that study so that everybody comes together at the same time, same place, with the same mindset. And so we need to set aside specific times and places to have our together time. Keep a running and up-to-date prayer list. This is something I try to work on. I try to keep a list. I try to keep a prayer list on my desk at all times. And that thing, man, it gets longer and longer and longer. And so but I rearrange it from time to time depending on needs for individuals. But have a prayer list. Bottom, be consistent. Be consistent in your devotion life. All right, top of page 31. The benefits a couple can anticipate as a result of their devotion life. Number 1, for first, a devotion life gives a couple confidence and assurance that they are not alone on their journey in life. In other words, it helps us to understand, number 1, that we have each other, but we also teaches us that we have God. When we're reading our Bibles and our minds are attuned to things going on around us, it reminds us of the wisdom and the power of God. It helps us to live faithfully. I'm not crazy about any of those passages that are there. 1 Corinthians 15:58 tells us to be steadfast and unmovable. I guess a Bible study, a personal life study life would help us there. Revelation 2:10 is talking about being faithful even under the threat of death. And 2 Timothy 4:6-8 is Paul's assurance that there awaits him a crown of life as he has drawn near to the end of his life. And so, Bible study helps us to live faithfully. Helps us to develop a sense of oneness in our relationship together. Devotion life promotes and sustains Christian values. That's a very important thing in our day and time. The pendulum has swung in the wrong direction for a long time. My personal belief is I think it's in the process of swinging back. I think some of just the absolute ridiculousnly of left-leaning politicians has finally awakened some people to how ridiculous these positions are. Studying our Bibles helps us to be firm in our convictions about what the Bible teaches, regardless of how the social pendulum may swing. Fourth, devotion life sustains or promotes fifth, devotion life assists in developing spiritual and emotional security. In other words, teaches and encourages singleness of mind and purpose. All right, any thoughts thus far? All right, moving on, middle page 31. A healthy physical relationship contributes to a happy marriage. Now, we've spent some time in the earliest part of this particular study, so I'm not going to belabor this, but it does remind us of the importance of our physical relationship with regard to our happiness in marriage. God created men and women as sexual beings, and He declared that to be very good. Everything was good, day one, but after God created man and woman, then He declared it to be very good. Number one, talking about there are 5 biblical principles that couples should remember and embrace with regard to their physical relationship. One, that intimacy in marriage is good. It is good. Number 2, it is for pleasure. Number 3, it is confined or limited to the marriage relationship. It is an overt expression of unselfish affection. I never heard it put that way, but that is correct. And then 5th, it is not to be interrupted. I want to talk just a minute about the first 2, about how it is good and it is for pleasure. I think, again, purely my opinion, okay? Purely my opinion. I think that much of the teaching that was done when I was a youngster, okay, much of the teaching that was, and I don't think, for the most part, that in the church that this teaching has changed considerably. But that whenever purity, whenever purity is encouraged and virginity is encouraged and held up as a model, that sometimes that the sexual relationship was somehow in some ways interpreted as being unclean. In other words, there's the don't, and there's not the encouragement. The encouragement is on the negative side as opposed to the positive side. In other words, we've, and I say we again. I'm going to talk about me and some of the encounters that I've had in teaching young people. Is that we only seem to talk about the bad things that happen when we don't follow God's plan, and we don't teach about the good things that come when we follow God's plan. Does that make sense? And by the way, we can all list all the negatives, can't we? if I give you a blank piece, if I gave you a blank piece of paper in about 2 or 3 minutes, we could all make a list of all the negative sides, right? Because those things have just been ingrained in our minds, just drilled into our heads. And I would suspect, although I've never been a part of it, but I would suspect that, Lisa, what was the name of the program that Mom was involved in? TGIF? I would suspect that even some of that was geared toward, obviously it's an abstinence-based program, abstinence-only program, which is obviously good. That's what God wants. But that the program itself seems to be, if you don't practice abstinence, then here's all the bad things that can happen. Of course, it's obviously impossible to go into the public school system and teach what God says is the good things about waiting until you're married and all that. And so there is a place for that. And I think it's borne out that program's been helpful. I don't think there's any question about that. But at the same time, we haven't emphasized the good things on the other side. And so, I think that, and what I'm getting at is that because all the negative things are taught and emphasized, then there's the lack of anticipation and the appreciation and the recognition of all the good things that happen when we do things the way God wants us to do. Now look, you might think I'm way off base. I'm just telling you what my experience has been, the way we were taught, and the way I taught it, for a long, long time. And I just don't think it has given us a healthy understanding and idea of intimacy in marriage. And so, we need to emphasize that it's good. God created it. It's good. He made it for us. He made it, He made it for us to be happy, and He made it for pleasure. And there's absolutely no there's no negativity. There's nothing dirty or shameful about it. And so we need to teach the positive as well as the negative. What are the even sometimes when we teach what are the benefits of waiting till marriage, we still go to the negative. Well, if you wait till marriage, then this won't happen, and this won't happen, and this won't happen, and this won't happen. And so even in trying to talk about the benefits, we go to the negative side. And we want to teach the affirmative side. Again, rejoice with the wife of your youth. Read the book of, read the Song of Solomon sometime and see what God has to say, about the joy and the goodness of what He Himself created from the very beginning of time. And so I just thought for a moment, I just want to think about or talk to you about how we've approached it completely one-sided, and haven't talked about the good things. And so just something to think about. Number two, under the big heading number 2 on page 31. What can a couple do to enhance the physical relationship of their marriage? And number 1, it says, let love be the pillar that supports their entire relationship. That love manifests itself through acts of affection, expressions of concern for the other's physical needs, their spiritual needs, and their emotional needs. Bottom of page 31 over to 32. To possess and manifest a mutual trust and respect for one another. Now there has to be an unequivocal trust and confidence that our spouse, our mate, our companion will be faithful to their marriage vows for life. I already gave you Malachi 2:15. You've dealt treacherously with the wives of youth. I mean, not that they were adulterously unfaithful, but they were unfaithful to the covenant that they had made. And so the word there, of course, I mentioned was last Wednesday night, 1 Thessalonians 4, 3-8, about some of the problems in the church at Thessalonica in regard to this. Number 3, or third, experience and exhibit total, unquestionable commitment to each other. Our first, aside from our relationship to God, as married couples, our first priority has to be our spouse. Our first priority has to be our spouse. And we increasingly, as a society, for example, in American society, have moved our focus from our mates to our children. And that children, all the activities that surround raising children and all the extracurriculars are now the focus of everything. It's the focus of all of our spare time. It's the focus, of our finances, and all the things that go with that. And so we've hurt our marriages by making our children the focus of our relationships as opposed to our mates. Number 4, or fourth, communicate and share openly feelings, needs, desires, pleasures, etc. On page 32, we're going to get into the matter of communication, and so I'll just use this kind of as a segue for next week. But communication in marriage is a huge problem. Or I should put this, the lack of communication and misguided or misdirected communication. And the next, we'll have to deal with this next week, but the next 2 pages talk a lot about the importance of communication and how to communicate. And so, but communication is also a key to intimacy and to fulfillment in that regard. I know I'm not going to get any comments on that part. All right. For next week, we'll just pick up in the communication section on page 32, and we'll just start with communication and we'll finish this up next week.